So far, we've talked about adding settings to the customizer, but what if we wanted to make some changes to the default customizer? That's completely possible and allowed. If you believe you know a better way the customizer should be displayed for your theme, then you're completely allowed to do that. Let's explore some ways to customize this. The first thing I want to do is group my sections into something called panels. Panels are a way to group sections. If the theme customizer had a hierarchy, it would be panels, sections, controllers. Creating a panel is pretty straightforward. Inside the main customizer file, I'm going to call the add panel method. I'm calling this method inside this function instead of a separate file because it encompasses everything. However, you're free to organize this however you like. This method has two parameters, which is the ID and an array of settings. I'm going to set the ID to Udemy. The array will have three keys. The first key is the title, which should be human readable. I'm going to set this to Udemy and make it translatable. The next key is description, which will be Udemy theme settings. It's important that you add some p tags as it'll format it properly. The last key is priority, which will determine the location. The higher the number, the lower placement it gets. I'm going to set this to 160. This will add a panel to the customizer. Now we can add the sections to this panel. To add a section to a panel, you have to specify it inside the add section method. Open both customizer files for the social and miscellaneous settings. Look for the add section method calls and add a new key called panel and pass it in the panel ID we set earlier. Refresh the page and you should now see the panel Udemy, and if you click on it, you'll find both sections appearing under it, which is what we wanted. Now let's talk about customizing existing controllers and sections. There is this section called Site Identity. Let's say I wanted to change the title to General. To do that, you need to grab the section or controller and modify its settings. Before we can do that, we have to know the ID of what we want to grab. Inside the main customized file, I'm going to var dump everything and format it with pre-tags. Refresh the page and you should see this huge object outputted. You'll find a lot of information related to the customizer, including all the sections, controllers, and panels. I'm going to skip to the sections array. Here, you'll find all the sections defined so far. As you can see, you'll find all the keys similar to the ones you can set when using the add section method. I'm going to look for the section with the title site identity. After finding it, I now see the ID is title tagline. Back inside the customizer file, I'm going to call the getSection method. This method will grab a section and all its settings. You have to pass in the ID, which would be title tagline as we saw earlier. From here, I can then modify any property I want. Previously, when using the add section method, we used an array for the settings. However, after a section is added, the settings will be converted into an object with properties and methods. Because of that, we have to change the settings as if they were properties. Despite the conversion, the names are usually the same. In this case, we can set the title to general like so. This is how you would modify any section, panel, or controller. For controllers, you use the getControl method. For panels, it's getPanel. For settings, it's getSetting. If you're unsure about a name or an ID or a particular value, it's always good practice to dump the customize object like we did here. I'm going to comment out this bit of code. Alright, the last thing I want to do is customize the user experience. Whenever we update a setting, you'll notice the page refreshes, which is pretty decent, but the loading time is something that's not really desired. In this case, we will want to make some settings not refresh the page. Rather, we can use JavaScript to update the settings. To accomplish this, we'll have to make some minor tweaks to the settings we defined earlier. Open the MISC function and search for the cart and search button settings. I'm going to define a new key called transport and set it to post message. There are two possible values for this key. By default, it's refresh, which will instruct WordPress to refresh the page whenever this value is updated. By setting it to post message, you're telling WordPress that you will use custom JavaScript code to reflect the changes on the page. Open the file assets/js/theme-customize.js file. I created this file for you already, and all it is an empty jQuery initializer function. We'll be updating this very soon. I only want to load this file if the customizer is loaded. Otherwise, it would just be a wasted download. To do that, we have to add a new action inside the functions file called customize preview init. The function to call is ju customize preview init. I'm going to create a file inside the customizer folder called enqueue and define the function here. Lastly, I'm going to include it. This hook will only run if the customizer is loaded. Its purpose is for loading style sheets and scripts only. I'm going to call the wp-enqueue-script function. The ID will be ju theme customizer. Pass in the URL like we did previously. The value for the dependencies is very important here. We require two things, which is jQuery and the customize-preview. The customize preview file has some helper functions and methods for working with the customizer. You'll see what those are in just a moment. The version will be false, and I want to load this in the footer. Just like that, our file should now be loaded. Let's go back to the JS file to make the finishing changes. Since the customized JavaScript file is being loaded, we're provided with an object called WP, which contains all the methods and properties related to WordPress. One of these methods is called customize, which allows you to get the value of a particular setting. In this case, it would be ju header show search. The second parameter for this method is a callback function for using the value. The callback function is provided the current value. I'm going to bind this value so that we can keep an eye out for any changes. This method takes in another callback function that's passed in a new value. We will refer to it as newVal. Since this is a checkbox, we can simply check to see if there's any value set. If there is, then we want to show the search button. Otherwise, hide it. The ID of the search button is top-search. We can use the show and hide jQuery methods respectively. I'm going to do the same for the cart button. It's the same bit of code, we're just replacing the IDs. Let's refresh the customizer one more time. One thing I should note is that sometimes your code may not be loaded as some browsers will cache files, so be sure to clear your cache if that's the case. Test out the code and you should see the buttons disappearing depending on if the boxes are checked. You should not have any page refresh. All this is being done with JavaScript code, which makes for a smoother user experience.